Welcome to Carefree and Conscious with me, Susanne Wilson, the Carefree Medium. If you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe. If you had a near-death experience as a young child, how might your life be different today? Jacob Cooper had a childhood near-death experience, and today he is working to bring as much inner peace to others as he can. He holds a Master of Social Work degree and is a licensed clinical social worker and certified hypnotherapist who also does past life regressions. It is through his childhood near-death experience and the past life regressions that he has learned insights that he shares about the mysteries of life on the other side of the veil. And now, Carefree and Conscious, childhood near-death experience reveals an old soul. Jacob Cooper, welcome to Carefree and Conscious.
Oh, it's a big honor. Thank you, Susanne, for having me on your show.
I can't wait to just jump right into what the heck is a small child doing having a near-death experience? Do you feel like there was a reason, like there was a plan behind this? Did the universe conspire to give you this as a gift? And tell us what happened.
Undeniably so. I think all of our life has an intelligence behind it, a reason behind it, even our own exit points when we leave this life, especially, and something so profound as an NDE, no matter what age it happened, I think was really all in the playing. So there was certainly reasons for it and an intelligence that went far beyond this lifetime. But yes, I had mine just at the age of 3 years old in September of 1993, which for people who hear NDEs is a lot different of an age, to have one. So it was profound. It was a double-edged sword in my life, but something that I'm forever grateful for, looking back on it.
Well, walk us through as much detail as you feel we should have about, what killed that body.
Yeah. Yeah. I was, going to a playground as a young 3-year-old boy. And at the time, I had something called whooping cough, which otherwise known as pertussis. And so for infants, children, and adults, it could be fatal if left untreated. And I went to the playground. I climbed up onto a ladder, onto a slide. And on the top of the ladder, I just began to suffocate due to this whooping cough. And there was no breath to hold on to. There was nothing to grasp on. And I don't pretend to sugarcoat it. To this day, it was the scariest moment of my life. Um, I was placed in this position where I wasn't able to breathe. There was nothing to hold on to. And so, if you're ever in a car and you're trying to gun an engine at a car that's not working, there's no point in really staying in the car. So I just got out of my body. I got out of the car, so to speak, and I popped the hood to kind of see what's going on. And I was able to become aware of my body. And I just kind of like if you're in a basement in a home and you shut off all the breakers of the basement, that was occurring to my physical body, due to the deprivation of oxygen. And it was out of my control. There was nothing that I could do about, my body going. And then moments later, I was able to look and feel my brain. And I was able to really understand my body and the brain through such a clear, transparent angle. And, you could go to medical school for years or study the brain and neuroscience. But I probably had more privyness and awareness of that than most doctors at a young age. And this had nothing to do with my physical awareness. I had no awareness of this prior to, obviously. But then I was able to feel my own brain. And I felt that due to the deprivation of oxygen, I just felt an incredibly large crack within my brain, this like large cracking noise, as if, a plug is pulled from a wall and the electricity is, flowing into that lamp and that plug is just yanked. And so there's a saying that we have in the English language, which is my brain cracked open and that's when God came in. And this literally happened to me, this euphemism, where once my brain was deprived of oxygen, that's when I really crossed over. But it was through letting go, really, of suffocating of my own breath and surrendering to this breath of eternity that can never be taken from me. This was my saving grace, was the power of surrender. And in this moment, I just had this profound crossing over experience. I felt myself elevating. And the best way I could describe it is, if you are familiar with like roller coasters, or if you know, think of like an astronaut going out into outer space, that kind of felt like that to me, where I was just ascending, where there was no possible end to how high I was going. But beyond that, there was no ending to how good I was feeling. So in our bodies, we're used to kind of like a cap on how high we could feel or how good we could feel inside. But I was going and crossing over to the other side. There was no end, beginning, or middle to euphoria. It was just endless. And this was what I was feeling. And I was able to become aware of my body, which which was in the park at that day, as also was the disembodied part of myself too. And I became aware of the right part, the right side of my brain, which I learned now corresponds to the creative centers of ourselves. But to the right side of my brain, I became aware of this golden, beautiful palace where there was endless angels that was there, and there was a beautiful sound. And the best way I could describe this is a representation of all that there is, was, and will be. And in our vernacular, we call that God, or the center of the universe. But words are quite limiting. But this to me was the point where all things, every thought, every living thing, every non-living thing emanates from and connects to. And there was just like this endless pinnacle of reality that I was connected to. And that's the best way I could describe as the divine. But then I became also aware that I was worried about myself, my 3-year-old self. I was worried, what would my parents feel? What would my life look like if I leave this life? And there was like an adjustment phase that was happening within my NDE. And then within those fears that I was having, there was a consciousness that I had. And so a lot of NDEers talk about Jesus Christ itself, but to me, the other side, I think of it as vibration and consciousness. We're all just kind of vibrating at certain rates, but the almost highest pinnacle of the other side, I felt this Christ-like vibration and consciousness. And in that moment, I felt incredible love, incredible understanding, and I was looked up at and not down at, and all my fears dissipated. But there was this moment of awareness of all is well, was well, will be well, and all my fears dissipated. And then my own spirit guides were there with me, and they really helped me, go down into the slide where I was, irresponsive to all the people's calls. But these were my two guardian angels. When we think of angels, there's different forms, but the guardian angels are the ones that we're contracted to and with before we were born, and they're with us until the day we leave this world and beyond. And so there was a male and female guide, and when I looked at them, they were the most beautiful, magnificent guide. But I felt quite ashamed that I just forgot that they were with me on this journey this whole time. I just had my own blinders on, and it was just a great reunification with them, but also like, geez, they were with me this entire time. But I just had my blinders on. And when I saw my guide, it kind of felt like if you have the most respected celebrity that you like worship or look up to or just have a crush on, but they're totally invested in you. Yeah, that's kind of how it felt with my guides. I'm just like, wow, like it was humbling in a way, but I was just like, why me almost? But they looked at me not through judgment, but they looked up at me, with unconditional love, respect, and understanding. Um, and then moments later, my body was on the ground, and all the people that was with me at the park and the playground that day were calling my name, and I felt my body on the ground, but my spiritual body was to the side of it, and I could feel my own form. And as they were trying to call me, I could see them, but they couldn't see me. They were just looking at my body. And I just remembered how we use a body, but we are not our bodies. Those are temporary kind of shells that we use. Those are vehicles, but those are not the totality of who we are. And in that moment, I was able to look at all the participants around me, and I saw that they had beautiful auras, just as you mentioned when you spoke to me, and they were magnificent. And looking back in it, I just recognized how spirituality is our core. It's as if you take us and squeeze each one of us. We're all pure spirits, at our core, each one of us. And some embody it, some remember it, some forget it. But at our core, we're all a pure light, pure divine beings. And then those moments, I just looked up and I became aware of a countless sea of angels that were floating right in front of me. And I just almost had to pinch myself because it just felt so real. And it was still, again, an adjustment phase. It wasn't like I just crossed over to the other side and boom, I was there. There was still, it was familiar, it was home, but I still had two things coexisting where my, soul and then my physical body in the consciousness that I had in that lifetime, as 3-year-old Jake. So there was two things coexisting. But as I looked up at the angels, they were just this kind of gold color, and they weren't like a million miles away. They're right over this reality, as if you take a little dial and just turn it up a little bit, and there was this filter of all these angels, and they looked almost identical and very youthful in their presentation, but they were just there, floating and sending beautiful love and energy, and I could hear their beautiful sound, and I just I just remembered like thinking like, geez, this is just I can't this is just too it was almost too much. Um, and then I was able to see my own family members on the other side, my soul family that we call it, and they approached me as well as others from previous lives that I had a profound connection with. And then, last part of my NDE was just this big question, which NDEers are often told, hey, it's not your time. You have more work to do, or you're given autonomy, you're given a choice. And that was the most significant question I've ever been faced with. But maybe after this interview, I'll second guess that. But no, they they asked me, "What will you do? Will you stay with us on the other side, or will you continue as your 3-year-old?" And again, that curiosity of what I would look like, what my life would be like, why am I here? Kind of came to my mind, and I said, "Well, if I do stay, kind of, what will this life be?" And then in moments, I was shown flashing imagery of not only this lifetime in what I felt and what others people felt, but also different lifetimes. It was like spanning the globe and going through different incarnations that I had. But there was two or three, lifetimes, which hopefully we could get into the show. That and the last one in particular, that was so, I think, and it goes back to the first question with my NDE. It was in such parallels with my NDE. This was a lifetime, in which I had a death by suicide, and this has been read by tons of different intuitives and psychics before I became public at all. And the same exact imagery that I saw and whatever I've seen, without me saying a word, has been evidentially read by different intuitives. But I just remember the parallels looking back on it of my NDE in this last lifetime, in which I felt like my back was against the wall. There was no hope. There was no anything. I just felt trapped. And I decided to end the pain. The pain was too much. And my NDE was just a reminder, that we could have pain and we could have suffering, but that has a time limit, and by surrendering and letting go of the suffocation of life, there's a new breath of restoration in all of us. And the Hebrew language, which I come from, the word for spirit translates to the wind of God, the breath of God. And so that reminded me that through the power of surrender, there's this beautiful restoration and this beautiful power within all of us to transcend even death itself. And I'm certainly living proof of that. Then moments later, I saw myself in the work that I would be doing in this life. And I saw myself speaking in front of tons of people. And it wasn't like I was a pompous teacher that was better than, not at all. It was that I was used as a vehicle for this message. And I looked at the eyes of all the participants and I saw how they were transformed through this experience. And I said, wow, as beautiful as the other side is, that will always be there. But this unique opportunity to live and continue this life through this experience is a unique window that I may never have again. And so I decided to put heaven on pause and to embody it. And that moment later, through the power of choice, through the power of agreement, was when all of the angelic beings and spirit guides left my immediate awareness, but they never left me. And the last moments that I had, I just had a lot of fears. I said, geez, I can't believe I did this. Like, how do I know this will all come true? And my guides just really told me that, you know, in other words, we just have this beautiful guided life and to trust it. But there's a power of our beliefs and a power of our thoughts, and how our thoughts could really derail us from the life that we were destined and born to live. And when we are in trust, we are in harmony with our soul's purpose. We are on track with who we are. And that moment, I woke up on a hospital bed and my mother was right there. And I had a doctor that was working on me, and I had really no vocabulary to possibly explain it. So the suffocation lasted for nearly 2 decades as I really kept this all all mostly to myself until the beach ball wasn't meant to be under the water. It was meant to come up, and it was time. So that's a little bit short of my NDE, but something that I base my life on each and every day that I live. It never left me.
Let's back up a little bit about the experience itself. 3 years old, right?
Yes.
So as you're stepping into this dimension of our, what I believe to be our true home, our heavenly home, Valhalla, Summerland, whatever you want to call it, you're stepping into that at first as a 3-year-old human consciousness. Did you have an awareness, like a switch being pressed, or something that you're now at what people love to say, old soul? They love to say, oh, that little boy or that little girl is such an old soul. You just feel different around them. Did you feel a change as you crossed over? And then when you came back, did you feel like an old soul?
I would say yes. I think in general, I would say I'm an old soul, regardless of the NDE, but the NDE allowed me to really remember my soul and who I was in the consciousness. Uh, but it also reminded me that we're not our physical ages. I think we experience ourselves in those physical ages and cultures and time frames. These are filters of experiences, but they're not the full totality of who we are. And so we're not our bodies, we experience our bodies. We're not our ages, we experience all these things. But beyond all those experiences, is a timeless soul that we all possess. But sometimes our identity gets really tied into where we are temporarily in our lives. But that's not the case long term from a spiritual perspective, as I understood. Um, but after my NDE, I was profoundly changed. And I know I'm not the most scientific guy, but I obviously, having NDEs, there's emergence of science and spirituality, and within science, there's like material reductionism, which basically you reduce the body, there is no consciousness, there is no awareness. You reduce the brain is no longer do we have consciousness. So for me, when I had my NDE, my brain, literally was deprived of oxygen, and I had this, kind of a TBI, if you will. And so I learned that there was the brain, but there was this other higher mind within all of us. That, in other words, the brain does not produce consciousness, it filters it. So in preschool, I remember very little, but the only thing that I really remember was these higher dimensional experiences. I just remembered this sliver of light that was going through my brain, in preschool, and I was just able to connect to this higher awareness at a regular basis. It wasn't until, I looked at a classmate and was having, kind of the work that you do, or was just having interdimensional communication. I just looked at a classmate. I said, "Do you see what's going on around us?" And the classmate just looked at me in such a bewildered manner. And it was at that point that I just, again, the deflation of life, the loneliness, the deprivation of like oxygen continued, where I just felt like I was in my own little planet, and I felt very isolated, at a young age.
Do
Very
you think
different.
that feeling of isolation, or nobody gets me, was that a part of the growth?
I think we could grow a lot from learning how to walk alone, and from a very young age. We walk that path, but we could grow more by remembering that we are never alone, that there's always support, around us. And I don't think loneliness has so much to do with the support. It's more of a mindset. There's people who have very little degrees of support, but they feel connected. And there's people who have a million peoples around them that feel very alone. So I think it has everything to do with connection. And I always say, if you like the person that you're living with, you can never be alone, you know.
Good
That
point.
takes time. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that feeling of maybe guilt or shame of, oh, these are my guides or these are my angels. I know that I know you. I know that I should know you, but I know that I've forgotten you. You're only 3 years old, but yet you're in a unity consciousness state.
Right.
And so you remember the soul family that you're seeing, that there's no way you would know them. What is the purpose of that experience? And other than leading you on the path that you followed, how could that help anyone to see that they've had other lives, to see that there are guides all around them? What does that give us? What's the gift?
Yes. Well, to answer your question, I believe NDEers are chosen. Um, and each one has a different path. I think my own karma has a lot to do with why I had an NDE. But NDEs, they're not just for you. And when I was really able to, get public with my NDE was when I was able to really embrace it. I lived most of my life just having this experience, but there was this whole world in front of me. So to survive, I almost needed to just bury that part of me. It was always there, but I just needed to kind of push it away, kind of like Matt Damon in The Hereafter, where it's just, because the world around me was more in love with regurgitation and information than it was imagination. And so I really had to push that away. But I learned that the NDE is, some people look at NDEs as, or mediums or whatever, as people with monopolizations of heaven, like we own heaven, and that's not our job. Our job is to be a gentle tap on the shoulder to remind others of how connected they are and how we all are connected to the kingdom. And that's my real duty, is to just put this message out there, and hopefully people will remember who they really are, and that we're all just kind of tourists here on this planet, but we have a home, beyond this place that we're forever connected to.
We have a home beyond this place. And I love that you say that the NDE is not necessarily just for the experiencer. They're meant to be shared. And a lot of people are sharing them now, thanks to places like IANS, the International
Mm,
Association for Near-Death Studies. I know that really helped me when I found their website after the 2007 experience I had. I'm like, oh, so I don't have to have been on an operating table
right,
and have my heart stop and have
right.
somebody time it to legitimize, what happened to me
Mm,
was absolutely real. What about people? What do you say to people who say, I didn't really experience much? I had a near-death experience, but I saw a light and I saw a tunnel and I saw nothing else. They feel left out. What
yeah.
do you tell them?
Yeah, it's sometimes we look at NDEs through the human eyes, which really kind of ranks and compares and contrasts. Someone has a New York Times bestseller, they're a better NDE than someone who didn't. And, they're all unique. No one owns the other side. It's like saying that I own air, that I could chop up air. We're talking about the infinite, and it's all inside of us. And Jesus himself, and I'm not so religious, but doesn't Jesus himself say the kingdom of heaven is in me is also in you too? And in a way, who better to know the kingdom, than Jesus himself in that regard? So what I would say to people is it's important, not necessarily so much what you think, but to tell your story. And you'll be amazed with how profound your story is to another. Um, in my lifetime, I was once at a yoga, center, and this came after a very difficult time in my life. And a woman came up to me and she said, I see you speaking in front of a crowd of people. And I never met this person. She said, you're going to be a healer one day. And at that time, I got kicked out of my house for a couple of days. And I walked around the park. I walked around the corner, and I was once again found in the playground. And I just remembered again my NDE, how we all are just children in God's playground. I just remember sobbing at that moment, where how sometimes we could feel kicked out of life or disenfranchised from life, or don't feel like we have a home. But because we're not really, this isn't really our home. We have a home beyond this. And the key is to carry that with us on our journey, to never have that leave us, to always remember that, that we're all connected. And when we go within, we really do connect to that place, you know, that to me is returning home, when you're going inward.
Jacob, I read that you started therapy at about age 10.
Yes.
So, what would you tell people who say, I don't know if I should go into therapy? How do you know when you need to have therapy? How do you know if you're mature enough or old enough to have it? And this applies to anyone who is struggling, needs help, is thinking of completing suicide, or maybe even just feeling like they've had a profound experience and it is just kind of lying there somewhere in the subconscious mind, and they don't know what to do with it, but it's affecting their lives. Why did you start therapy so young? How long did you stay in therapy, and what did it do for you?
Well, I was very fortunate. I can't lie. I come from a lineage of three different therapists. My grandmother was a therapist. My father's a therapist. I'm a therapist. My family always believed in, you know, getting help, reaching out for help, helping others, but also doing unto others as you do to yourself as well. Um, I think the NDE, really helped me to understand that we have multidimensional angles to our being, where we're not just our bodies. We have a psychology to us. We have a soul energy to us. And so for some people, they'll just go to the gym and do curls and say, I have to work out my body. And that coincides with mental health too. But once you recognize that you have a psychology, that you have an emotional makeup too, that in turn becomes a responsibility. And at times, the world could overtake that and it become, too overbearing. The issue, though, is a lot of cultural myth that we inherit, which says in order to be strong, you have to do it on your own. Asking for help is weak. If you're feeling emotional, that's weak too. So from a very young age, we've been taught to really stifle our emotions, to push them away, to ignore them. And, there's a part of that, there's a part of that self of ours that always just needs to be nurtured. That's for many not being nurtured. So I think anyone could really benefit, from processing their lives, from talking to someone. It's a question of motivation, and it's also a question of finding the right person for you too. I've found in my own life there could be the greatest therapist on earth, but there may not be for you. Or, we also have transference too, which is a lot of subconscious experiences that may interfere with that therapeutic alliance. But once you recognize that we have physical health, and we also have mental health, that becomes a responsibility too. So I look at it no differently than going to a physical doctor, going to the gym. It's just another outlet to sharpen, that part of ourselves, to enhance our lives, if you will.
Do you think that at some point or at any point or even now, do you feel overly responsible for healing other people because of some of the things that happen to you? Do you take on the weight of the world?
I try to. I try not to. I try not. That wasn't a subconscious slip. I try not to. Uh, but what I do understand in this life, I think there's two different types of people. I think there's people who primarily focusing on life, giving them things and taking, or there's people who focus on giving. And when you have an NDE, you recognize, what lasts and what does not. Um, what does not last is, all the physical things and the egos and, the degrees and all that stuff, is a human construct. And eventually the human construct falls on its own. The things that last are things and matters of the soul, which is, the impacts that we had in others, the love that we felt and gave, the relationships that we built. And so for me, my NDE gave me back life. It reminded me of the eternity of life, but it also gave me a second chance at life. I'm not a cat with nine lives, but I definitely had two in this life. And it inspired me to give that back to others. But I will say though, is that I learned in life that you could be very motivated, but you can't drive the car for the person. They have to do it on their own. But through hopefully our influences and our examples, they can remember who they are. And so when I talk about the afterlife and I come in front of people, I don't see myself as just Jake. I see myself as a reflection that other people remember in themselves, in the messages that are familiar to themselves. So I try not to make it about me. When we're connected to the light, it's not really about me. We're just conduits of the light for people to remember what's within.
Well, that is a wonderful point that you've just made. It's about the consciousness and the connection that we have. So you're not saying this is what happened to me and you should listen and take messages just from what happened to me. You're talking about everyone can have an experience that blows their mind,
Mm-hmm.
and they can find the gift in there, and they can find the opportunity for transformation in there. And to that end, I think we have a question from somebody in the community here. We're recording in front of our online community, Carefree Souls. Diane, can you bring Gretchen's voice on for us?
So my question was, did your ND experience, has that transformed the way that you you treat or work with your clients in your sessions?
Yes, I would say so. Gretchen, that's a good question. As Suzanne was saying, my motto within the work that I do is we all have our stories, which to me is things that happen in our life, but many times things that we walk into. But the meaning of our lives is the meaning of our stories and how we decide to write those stories and what beauty we decide to craft with those stories. And so with my clients that I encounter, it's, yes, what happened to us is not our fault, but what we come out of it, becomes our responsibility. And so I use my NDE in that same format with what happened to me was what happened to me within my NDE, but what I came out of that became my responsibility. And that's really the model that I work with my clients, is to find ways for them to be authors of their own stories. And you don't have to write a book to be an author of your own story, but really to take that power back from very much disempowered, circumstances, in life. So really it's about empowerment. That's when we could really make changes. So, but also allowed me to see that, traditionally I was trained as a therapist, and many times it's very much pathology based. We would just focus on the DSM criteria, and which is really mostly for billing purposes. But someone would come in, they would say, okay, that's a generalized anxiety patient, or that's a major depressive patient. And I would say this person's experiencing that, but I would also within my NDE be able to see them past the pathology, and I would see their difficulties as strengths, that they must be incredibly resilient, strong people to be going through each and every day their own trials and tribulations. So it made me a different clinician in a sense, where I was a lot more strengths based and focused more on empowerment rather than trying to just focus on the negative or the pathology, that is within a part of mental health that could be very debilitating, in clinical work, I find.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks for the question. I think we have a question from Wanda also. Can we bring Wanda on, Diane, please?
Hi. Oh, I was just struck by the fact that you were 3 years old, but had the understanding during the NDE of a 50-year-old. And I just wonder what you thought about that.
It's a good question, Wanda. Your name is very synchronistic, because the individual who was a part of saving my own life was named Rhonda. And this is her 1-year heaven anniversary. And I would call her Help Me Rhonda, like the Beach Boys song. But she saved my life. Her family did. What I would say, Wanda, is, none of us are who we think that we are many times. Many times we associate ourselves with our ages. But what I would say is that there is a you beyond the you. There's a lot more than what we see ourselves in this construct. Many times we walk in this box and we have certain identifications. I'm 33 years old, I'm 50 years old, and that's how we see ourselves. And it's kind of complicated, but we experience ourselves in the human form through these different transitional phases and cycles in this life. Beyond that, is an infinite, all-knowing soul. And so I always say two things could be true at the same time. And my NDE, that was true as well, where I was connected to my 3-year-old self too. That consciousness was there, but also beyond that was a broader consciousness of my soul. And, that was really who I was. So I was connected to my 3-year-old self, but yeah, I don't think any of us are our physical ages. We are infinite consciousness experiencing ourselves in different time frames of our life. And I know that's mind blowing, but that's all I could say. That's my truth. I
Yeah,
hope that
and
makes sense.
it seems like we can tap into that wisdom of, if you want to say, your soul or your higher self at any time too, maybe through a meditative state, through journaling, being in the present moment. I mean, that there's so much wisdom we can tap into at any given moment. Tell us about how the wisdom of Jacob's ladder can empower people to tune into their own inner wisdom.
Mm, yes. Well, the wisdom of Jacob's ladder was really, a homage to biblical Jacob, and that's my name. And biblical Jacob was, had a covenant with his father Esau, but his brother with his father Isaac, but his brother Esau was chasing him, and he was running for his life. And he had a dream at a place that I visited in Israel called Beit El, translated as the house of God. And when he dreamed, he slept on, pillars of rocks, and he saw the angels going up and down the ladder. And there's so much allegory and symbolism with my name, Jacob, and the ladder that I was on, and all this stuff, and seeing angels. So there is so much in a name. But I use the ladder not just because I had my NDE in a playground on a ladder, but the ladder to me is symbolic of heaven and earth. That each incarnation that we have, each experience that we have is another way to ascend, another way to grow. So the wisdom of Jacob's ladder is a very practical, kind of way of the different rungs from the hereafter in my NDE for the here now, so that people don't have to wait until they die, to finally live and to remember who they are and to connect to heaven. But we could have this experience right here, right now. And we do that, as you mentioned before, by connecting to who we really are. And, meditation is what I view as finding intimacy with eternity. It's a way to remember our eternity. And when we meditate, we recognize that we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, we're not our bodies. We're these sacred eternal observers. And you just know when you meditate that that part of you can never be taken. That part of you goes on, and you're in touch more with the real you. You know,
You're in
that makes
touch more
sense.
with the real you. What would the real you be like if you had decided not to pursue the path that you're on? What do you think you'd be doing? And do you feel like you'd be content?
I'd probably be bugging you through these readings, in these galleries, you probably we would know each other one way or another, but I probably would be talking to media, but I don't know. Either way, once you recognize that you don't die, you recognize that there's only life, so life could be found on the other side, but it could also be found here too. And the key is, though, a lot of people aren't alive while they're alive. And that's the sad part, and I think a lot of people aren't living while they're living. And so I know whatever would happen, I would be okay. Um, if I was over there, or if I was over here, but over here is more of a choice. It's a choice and a decision to live. And, that's what I try to do in my own personal life, and to help out other people is to live while I live. Um, that, that's the choice. When you're over there, you're into eternal life. That's where you are. But the key is to live while we live. And that's what I'm trying to do each and every day.
Without fear.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I find a funny relationship with fear, because I find that that's a very human thing.
Tell us about that, because there is a lot being said about how we should have no fear. The Bible, the most often written phrase is "do not fear" or "have no fear."
Right.
Is a little bit of fear healthy? What's the balance here, Jacob?
Like I said, I think two things could be true at the same time. I mean, I find, you know, in the New Age movement, there's like a big bypassing neglect of emotions and mental health. And, everything's light and love and angels and fairies. And if you feel anything negative, then you're gaslit, and that's non-valid. And I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think that's practical. Um, I think what's important is to learn how to kind of be like a monk each and every day. And by a monk, I mean we want to relate to our life experience with wisdom, with compassion, with understanding. And it's not just we relate to light that way, but we also relate to things that are uncomfortable to us. And that to me is the embodiment of unconditional love. And fear, if it wasn't meant to be a part of the human experience, it wouldn't be there. But I find, that you could have fear and you could also move forward. And that to me is called faith. Faith is not the absence of being scared or feeling upset, but it's walking forward and trusting, a higher good beyond, our current emotions and our current feelings. And so that's why NDEs are pivotal. Albert Einstein would say, and I quote this in many of my interviews, but the most significant question that we have in our lives is a universe or God a loving universe or God? Is it an ambivalent universe or God? Or is it a vengeful negative force? And I think how we view the afterlife and God is very pivotal in the lives that we live. If we trust, the afterlife, we trust God, as all loving, all knowing, all those kind of things, that could help us trust in a higher awareness more so than our own fears. And it allows us to go beyond the surface of what's happening in our lives in a way.
What is the purpose of grief? Why do we grieve? Is it necessary to have grief and loss in our human lives? What do you say?
It's a great question. I find that grief is very much a human thing because I don't think as a soul deep down we really grieve because the soul really knows the interconnectedness of all things, and there's no separation, but the human part of ourselves, feels that degree of separation of time and space and connection. Um, I find that grief, is now spoken about a lot more than it once was. And I think that's a beautiful thing because now people are able to identify what they're going through. Much like me and you, without the works of Dr. Raymond Moody, we may not be doing the works that we do. If we're able to identify what we're going through, it doesn't necessarily change, that thing, but it could allow us to take ownership and to identify it, and there's a catharsis that could happen, through understanding and tangibilizing what we're going through. But grief is nothing new. We've had thousands of people come and go before us. It's a natural response, but now we're getting more educated and up to speed with what it really is. And I think grief is a natural flow. It's a part of our lives. It's not to be resisted. But I think in a way, the world that we live in is very antithetical and diametrically imposes a lot of barriers to grief. Because I think the world that we live in is very trendy. It just wants to move on to the next thing, the next thing.
Like get over it. Why aren't you over that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're gaslit all the time by
Right.
others, for
Constantly.
having strong feelings or seeing, and how could there be when there's not great love for another, there's not a great emotional response. Those go hand in hand. So I love what, and I follow the work of David Kessler very closely, from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation, but I love what he says, that grief is kind of like a river where it takes you where you need to go. There's a river of grief that we have, and we just have to allow that river to flow. And, I promise through my work, there's a possibility of transformation from agony, from anguish, into purpose and meaning that could happen through grief. And through the countless people that I've, worked with, and all the people that we see, they found a lot of purpose behind their most painful experiences in their lives.
It can take some time, but it's there. So
It
what
can.
kinds of things do you do to support people while they're going through that river, while they're waiting? And sometimes it goes over their heads a little bit for a little while. How do you support people? What's consciousness consulting?
Well, part of my work as a therapist in a way is kind of like a Western monk, if you will. I try to just take on that role where, many times when people are going through grief, they're spoken to or they're spoken at. And I found in grief work that people really just want to be heard. They want an ear to listen to. They want to be heard. And so I've had a lot of counseling sessions, and some of the most profound counseling sessions was a client said to me, Jacob, that was the best counseling session I've ever had. And I go to them, I say, I didn't say one word. I said that was the best I've ever had. And that to me that could say a lot, but they could say the less Jacob, the better Jacob. No, but it could also say that people really are craving to be heard, to be listened to be seen. Um, and I think that's important because I find in grief that, people around them just say, okay, let's go on, let's move on, stop crying about it, stop whining about it, get over it. These are the things that they're in a better place, all these things. And some people mean well, but, people have to be allowed to process it at their own accordance. And not all loss is the same. I think people have to remind themselves that. And not all grief is the same. Grief is not just strictly of loved one. It could be an ending of a job, an ending of a relationship. On a global basis, the last 3 years, we've certainly had grief with the world that we knew and the world that we have. So it's something that could occur on a micro personal basis or on a larger scale, on a global basis too. And um, everyone has their own right to process things the way that they are meant to.
Everyone has the right to process their experiences in the way they are meant to. I think that's a big takeaway. And you've mentioned the word gaslighting several times throughout the interview. And you didn't say trope, but there are new age tropes about it's either love or it's fear. And I feel like there's so many different ranges of human emotion in between. And if we suppress those emotions, we're missing out on some growth because it's the processing of the emotions, the experiences, the integration of that leads to the wisdom. Is there greater wisdom occurring and available to us now because of all the chaos that's going on in the world? Or is it just an individual journey? And it doesn't, how do you put in perspective the suffering, the great suffering that's been going on, as you mentioned, the last 3 years? What is the perspective that we could feel better by considering that way of thinking?
I view on a global basis the last 3 years as a global near-death experience.
How so? Because people are going to say, wait, I didn't see no tunnels. I didn't see no lights.
Right.
There was no angels swooping down and telling me it's going to be okay.
Right.
So you're going to have to explain that.
Of course. Yeah. By that, not all NDEs do we have to just, cross over in a way, but in a way, by that, it was a similar storm. Everyone was obviously in their own unique boat, but the rug that we were standing on, the foundation that we were on, was yanked from all of us to some degree. And for a period of time, we weren't certain if we were going to live another day, for a lot of us, that was very real, our own jeopardization of our body and the reminder, that, none of us here are here forever. None of us here come out, eternal in this body. Everyone has their own, time when they leave, so the concept of our own mortality was put, into the forefront for the globe. And so that's very parallel to the NDE, because the world that you were standing on was just kind of yanked, and then all of a sudden you had two roads in front of you. And at least for me with my NDE, I could have held on to the road of suffering and anguish, and that was very real, but I recognized it was temporary. But once I surrendered, to something deeper within myself, I was able to have a deeper GPS of that experience, to navigate that experience. And I found that, much like in the Bible, when there's strong winds, our foundation will allow us to really transform some of those winds. And we could find the eye within the hurricane, the eye in the storm, that centerpiece of awareness within any part of our life. But we have to really tap in on an inner basis. And I don't think all storms are there to break us, but in a way, they could be there to really, make us evolve, to make us have more depth to us, more understanding. There's many gifts of transformative experiences, and you don't have to go to the other side to have that. You could have that in your everyday life. the profound things are there for a reason, and we have to allow a deeper wisdom to be integrated, especially in those those difficult moments.
Okay. I love that explanation. I just sending you a spiritual hug for that right now. We have time for one more question from the community. I believe that Elizabeth C. has a question. Diane, can you help bring her on for Jacob?
Hi. My question sort of revolves around the fact that you're a therapist, and in the past, a lot of times, people who might present as seeing things or hearing things or getting information from other dimensions might receive a diagnosis for that.
Mm.
And so, how do you approach your work when maybe 50 years ago or 40 years ago, in the same situation, the therapist might not be able to consider that as anything but incorrect or a problem to be corrected?
Yeah, that really brings up the question of,
Right.
the difference between afterlife and ADCs and after-death communication experiences, near-death experiences versus psychosis.
Yeah. No, I mean, I work in a psychiatric hospital, and we even have mediums come into it. So,
Mhm.
it's a changed world. But for you, Elizabeth, I just, in my own mind, I wonder how many, John Edwards or Suzanne Wilsons were taken from us because they were actually having, real, spirit, evidential mediumship experiences that were misinterpreted, as psychosis and stuff like that. And they were just kind of put on all these medications and put in the blue room, and they were just totally misunderstood. And now, hopefully we're at a time where we're able to differentiate, something that's, a real, schizophrenic, intrusive, dark kind of thing versus something that is tapping into, something else beyond psychosis. And so certainly as a therapist, I'm able to look at clients, differently. I think if it's very dark, if it's very, kind of demonic, then that's more, psychosis. But if it's more
Yeah.
light, if it's more love, that's more psychic. So I try to differentiate psychic and psychosis within the work that I do, because I do
Yeah.
believe that's real. And now as clinicians, thanks to, let's say, the work of Dr. Judith Orloff, who speaks about clinical intuition, she's a clinical psychiatrist, recognizing as clinicians that intuition, is real, and we try to utilize that within our own practices, and we try to demystify that too.
Yeah, that's good to see that we're becoming a little more enlightened in that regard, and that people are not just
Mm.
judged all in one category.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing we want to do is take away people's gifts. My job is to help those gifts to be shined, and for others going through difficult moments, to work on that, as well too.
Well, we appreciate the question, Elizabeth.
Yes.
So we're getting ready to wrap up. Talk about the past life regressions, the soul families. You're having this experience very young of recognizing family members from your soul family during a near-death experience, and then devoting part of your work to doing regressions for people.
Right.
How does this all tie into therapy, your life's mission? What's different about doing a past life regression with you than doing it with somebody else who is certified? What lenses are you wearing when you do these regressions for people?
Right. Well, I mean, I was, professionally trained as a certified hypnotherapist, so I had a formal training, especially, and also past life regression. But I incorporate, a little bit of what happened to me in my NDE within the regressions. So within hypnosis, there's hypnotic inductions, and then we do, get clients, into hypnosis. And so I add on my own twist within my own regressions, my own scripts that I use with my clients based on my own training, but also I utilize my NDE with it. So there's, a twist. And so within my regressions, I not only just do past lives, but I also do kind of like the life between lives things. And I know Dr. Michael Newton's books really kind of highlights that a little bit more. The late Dr. Michael Newton and the Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls. So I do that as well. So it's not just past lives. We take clients through, some of their memories on the other side, that they may have, some of the charting phase that might happen, within their memories before they got here as well. Um, but really, the impetus behind getting into past life regression was just, I would say, the trauma that I had, from having an NDE, but also subsequently having this reoccurring memory of my past life, and I would just be playing baseball or running around and just seeing how I like took my own life and just remembering that constantly. And there was no one to talk to, and there wasn't like anyone to really identify it as. It was just very like annoying. And it wasn't until I was able to identify this as like, right, this is past life stuff. This is what it is, and there's modality for it. Was when I was really inspired to give back to others. So, like I said before, if you want to find your purpose, look to your pain, look to those difficult moments, because those difficult moments are really about your purpose. And so, a lot of people glorify my NDE or glorify past lives, but I got to tell you, it wasn't without difficulty. It wasn't without complexion. It made life as a child very difficult and traumatic. But I was able to transcend that because once I was able to utilize my own pain, that led to purpose, and the impact that I have to people every day is what keeps me going. So it's to give back what I was, given. And I think in life, people think of angels as once you leave this world, you just become an angel. But I think this world in many ways is a training guide to is a training to be a spirit guide. By that it means we have different experiences and we encounter people and we use our own framework to really enter someone else's world where they may be a couple exits before us, and exits that we traveled down as well too. So all things that we go through are not meant just for us, but for others that we encounter that we're meant to help.
It's the ordinary stuff. I remember when I was doing my hypnosis certification, one of the professors said, and now remember, if your client is sitting there going, they were Julius Caesar,
Right.
and they're reliving some episode there, they're probably confabulating.
Right.
And because it's the little things, it's the remembering that how the body died in the life and how that connects to what you're experiencing now, seeing
God.
people, pop up in different roles in your lives too. So I think my final question, is a two-part final question for you. I want to ask you, what thoughts you want to leave us with, anything that you want to say. But before that, Jacob, you give a lot of healing to a lot of people. Do you feel like you're getting healing back in the course of that?
Oh, absolutely. I start with every talk that I do, and I just take a pause and I look at the eyes of people that are in front of me, and I said, "You're the reason why I'm here. Each and every one of you is really why I'm here, and that's why we're all here." I had my NDE in a playground, and you could think of a playground how we're all just children playing in God's playground. We're here are our brothers and sisters keepers, here to protect each other, to take care of one another. We've gotten so far away from that in many ways, but there's also this movement that is so different, that's so connected, and we have so many tools to do that, as well too. So our foundation that we come out of life could be so transformative if it's proper, if it's right, if it's true. Um, kind of like a sunflower when it turns to the sun, if it's meant to, it has the right foundation, it's going to sprout, So I mean, to me, that gives me the most healing is to see the transformation of people and to give back what I was given. That keeps me going. Um, I'm not one for small talk, it's like I love sports, I love fragrances, like those are like my two biggest things. But other than that, like I'm not like it's to me, it's about meaning, it's about purpose, it's about essence. And I've always been that way, since a young kid. It's like, let's have a real talk. Let's talk about real things. And that's the way my job is. It's like, let's talk real. Let's talk about the real issues, not superficial ones. But I've learned in life, that the things that sometimes we identify as the little things are also the big things too.
Yeah, and that
just
could make you real intense. That could make you like, you could like exhaust people, right? If you could be, but you don't. You have found this balance between just kind of observing life, being in life while you're observing it, and having the meaningful conversations. And it's like your intensity is just like balanced by this real true interest in connection with people and seeing them connect in their lives. So final thoughts?
My final thoughts is, don't be daring to explore the unknown. In a lot of interviews, I will say this, and it's so true. Years ago, they really thought the earth was flat, and they still think, some people still think that way. But through, pushing those boundaries, we were able to find that that's not the case. And so sometimes, people will just live in this box and say, this is what I know. And the unknown, I'm scared of, I'm afraid of, I don't want to go there. But it could be a beautiful, healing, and it could really change the course of our lives if we're able to constantly, expand, that box that we view reality as, and so having an NDE didn't give me monopolization of that, but allowed me to continuously be an explorer of life, to constantly look at it with curiosity and openness. And I hope that when people hear my talk or go to any spiritual seminar, they're able to view life with the same curiosity. And that's how we grow, is to constantly expand on what we know by exploring the unknown. And death is something to talk about, because death is the ultimate unknown. But if you're able to change that framework or that box of the unknown and make friends with it, that unknown could be a great known to all of us. And it is a known deep down, because I think each and every one of us truly knows what happens. Otherwise, none of us would be tuning into this talk today. It would be crazy, but there's a part of us that remembers, and that's why we tune into this stuff.
Part of us that remembers.
Uh,
Well, thank you for helping us to remember who we truly are. Jacob Cooper, thank you.
Thank you for all you do, and thank you for all who listened.
Be sure and subscribe, and thank you for supporting Carefree and Conscious.